Welcome to the Into Novus Knowledge Agronomy Podcast, your go-to resource for agronomic insights, technology solutions, and ongoing education. At Into, we combine agronomic expertise from soil analysis to best practice application methodologies to provide a holistic view for your yield optimization. Our focus is on practical strategies that improve efficiency and drive better results in the field. Join us for interesting discussions, expert advice, and the latest advancements shaping modern agriculture. Whether you're in the field, on the road, or at your facility, we're here to keep you informed and ahead of the curve. Welcome to the N2 podcast. Thanks again for joining us today. Today I'm joined with Derek Cottrill, my counterpart in Northwest Missouri, and Rodney Phelps, counterpart in Illinois. How are you guys doing today?
Morning, Nick.
Derek, maybe if you want to start us off with a little bit of update, kind of where things are in your geography, stage-wise, et cetera.
Yeah. So for soybeans, we are getting into that reproductive timing almost for all beans now. We still got a few that are still at R1, but I'd say the majority's in that full flower R2, and might even have a few this week getting close to that R3. But I imagine we'll be in this flowering stage at R2 for a while. But corn, a lot of tassel corn out there now. I'd say the majority of it is ready for that tassel fungicide at this point. I saw last week the first corn that was shedding some pollen. That was at R1. So corn's moved along quickly in my territory.
Rodney, how about you?
Yeah, so I'm almost a ditto what Derek was just saying. Soybeans are in that R1 with the weather we're having and showers here and there. They're going to stay flowering a long time, which I'm okay with. And more pod sets we can put on, the better. Corn is, everything's coming on about the same time. Planes are in the air, will be today. A lot of corn tasseling, depending on hybrids, but I've been getting doused with pollen in some of them, and some of them they wait till the tassels clear out to start throwing pollen. So it's that time of year up in northern Illinois.
Thanks for the update, Rodney. Me, I'm a little more scattered out. So early planted, early RM soybeans, we're R2. And like Derek said, some of those really early ones are pushing R3. But then we've got double crop beans that just got planted. We've got some first crop beans that just got planted too. So some geographies that have been pretty wet. The corn, a lot the same story. The earliest planted stuff in the river bottom where they're accumulating a lot of GDU. Some of that is finished up pollination, so it's R2. To a lot that's full shed right now. To some of this May planted corn that hasn't shot a tassel, we're still kind of chest tall. V12, V10 in that range. Even saw some corn last week that was about 4 or 5 inches tall. So we've got just a little bit of everything over in this geography, which is going to make for a long season. With that said, I guess Rodney, I'll kick back to you. You mentioned where you're at growth stage wise. Corn that's in that R1, R2 stage. I guess maybe one, how do we identify it, and what's really going on within that plant?
So, excuse me, a lot going on in that plant as far as nutrient uptake, nitrogen uptake. Nitrogen, it's pulling about 8 pounds a day right now. Needing the highway, I call it, the stalk, needs to really be clear and free because there's a lot going on. And also, when I said that the timing on the pollen, if we don't keep the nutrient flow in that corn plant, we can kind of potentially miss nip, we call it, which is the pollen getting to the silks at the correct time to pollinate those kernels and start the kernel set. So right now, when you start seeing tassels, when we also need to pay attention to crop health, and is there anything when you're planning a fungicide app that we can put with that nutritional wise to also help that plant continue on.
Good points, Rodney. I just mentioned too, this corn that's sitting R2. Obviously, we've got we want ideal temperatures. We've got those right now at pollination, but even just after, we still want it. We can get some kernel abortion, et cetera. So ample moisture, good sunshine, not too hot of temperatures. Ideal to try to hold on to as much length on that ear as we possibly can. But good points, Rodney. I guess just to tie that back in to kind of move into this corn disease update, we wanted to mention a little bit of things there, just new developments since the last time we talked. We won't belabor the corn discussion. I think we probably got more to discuss on soybeans moving forward, but I'll just mention tar spot, kind of giving an update there, at least within Missouri. It's confirmed all across the state now pretty well. And I think any field you went into, if you searched long and hard enough, you'd probably find a lesion somewhere. I don't know about you guys, but I haven't seen a whole lot of progression though. I think it's just more still just a single lesion amongst the field or amongst that plant. But I will say with this high humidity, at least that we're having, where we're having dews that are hanging around till late in the morning, 10, 11 o'clock, or sometimes most of the day, we're getting pop-up shower precipitation, it seems like all the time. And then these milder temperatures we're having, all of that is lining up for good progression for tar spot, or at least it's showing up in more fields. It really likes the 7 hours of leaf wetness. It's getting that right now. And so that threat continues, I guess, at least in my opinion. That progression is going to keep moving forward potentially. So it's still something to be very mindful of. And especially right now, we still have an opportunity to do something about it. Rodney, I don't know if you want to mention anything different from your geography.
Yeah, and so you're spot on that, if you look long and hard enough, you'll find the lesions, but it's not progressing yet. But everything you just said is true that we were too hot about 10 days ago. Well, now we've cooled off and our nights are under 70 degrees, so perfect storm. But I've said in the past podcast, tar spot loves company. So right up in northern Illinois, I'm not seeing a lot of gray leaf. I'm not seeing northern those things. So it doesn't have any friends for it to attack with. So it's kind of in a latency period. Um, and I think it will rear its head. My hope is that it's comes in late, which is a cosmetic effect, not a yield effect. And so therefore, as we talk here a little later, that's why I feel a fungicide application is warranted to kind of put the icing on the cake, if you will.
Derek, you want to mention something along the lines of, I think Rodney teed that up well as far as other diseases potential. What could happen there?
Yeah, I mean, our other our key ones, whether that be southern rust or gray leaf spot, potentially some northern, but I guess my thing is I feel like we're disease as a whole, whether it's tar spot or other. I don't know if lucky is the right word the reason I say that is because disease is inevitable. But I feel like we're lucky because we're reaching our key timing in corn, our very sensitive timing in corn, that tassel, that pollination timing, and disease hasn't ramped up. We know it will. It's just, regardless of the disease out there, I'm just not seeing a bunch of it, or a bunch of progression, but it will happen. Like Nick said, the conditions are great. Um, and I feel like we have an opportunity here to stay ahead of it. And so my key thing is take advantage of this window because before tar spot came in 2015, um, you know, every year with all our diseases, we don't know when it's going to set in. But that's why I say I think we're lucky that we're hitting our key window, our sensitive window, and it's not ramped up yet. So take advantage of that and stay ahead of it and get your application made quickly. So.
Yeah, I think those are good points. I just mentioned the conditions we currently have are ideal for progression of things like gray leaf spot. And over my way, especially in these small river bottoms, we tend to have a lot of gray leaf spot pressure. Northern corn leaf blight will continue to ramp up too. It's a disease we used to talk about before tar spot, but we haven't talked about in a while. But it progressed on too with the conditions that we're having, mild temperatures, extended wetness, all that. And southern rust, I'll just mention it's in the southern half of Arkansas. It's just going to take one good Gulf storm to blow it up here. So all of that to just say a lot of disease threats on the corn side of things. Anytime you have this kind of moisture, which is great for growing corn, but you're also going to have that kind of potential for corn disease. So just be mindful of that. Rodney, one thing I would like for you to hit before we pass on from this topic is just that two pass versus one pass discussion. I know it tends to be a hotter topic up your way.
Yeah, so in a lot of years, operations will put a fungicide on early. When I say early, I'm in that V12, V13 time frame, and then come back late tassel. Um, and put a second application, especially if tar spot were to hit early. Well, this year, watching disease progression, and as we've just been talking, it's here, but it's not moving. It's kind of in the latency um, frame. And so, what I've been talking with guys is whatever your flavor of the day is for your fungicide, and I'll say I highly recommend using a branded, good fungicide with a track record behind it, and maybe up the rate on what you're using to the higher side of the rate, put it on at full tassel time, and that will give you good residual to get you through grain fill. And if and when tar spot comes in late in the season, it's purely cosmetic. You've already had you've made your yield, and so from the combine cab, you're going to see some tar spot lesions, but it did not hurt you as far as yield or performance in your corn crop. So I'm really recommending the guys a one application, potentially at the higher rate, get you a little 10 days, 2 weeks residual on the backside, and I think you'll be fine this year. And I'm going to speak for Northern Illinois, but I think as what we've been talking here, that's probably a pretty general consensus among the three of us.
Yeah, I think those are good points, Rodney. I mean, we go into a lot of specifics, but if you have especially on tar spot, a susceptible variety or susceptible hybrid, that's something you got to think about. Do I need to do a two pass or one pass? And to your comment, you can probably get by with a one pass if you utilize in high rates of a good fungicide with good activity on it. Just to move into another topic on the corn disease realm, it tends to get thrown in with fungicides, and that's just the onset or the appearance of Japanese beetles. And it does seem like in our geography, they're worse than they have been the last couple of years. I don't think they've coincided quite as well with corn pollination, as at least in central Missouri, as what they have this year. It's been a few years since they've done that. I guess I'll just start off on that from a corn piece of it, or corn opinion. And this is just this is just specifically speaking in my geography, but we tend to overblow that threat in corn, in my opinion. The Japanese beetle piece of it, and I'll just say there's a lot of people that want to include an insecticide to take care of Japanese beetles. I I mean, there has been a case before in my career where I thought maybe we should have sprayed for them, but I have also seen more cases where we've had spider mite issues later in corn because we did spray for Japanese beetles. I'll just say there's a couple of problems. Number one is if you're going to spray for Jap beetles, that means you need to spray that corn right at the onset of pollination, because once we get past pollination, they're not causing any problems. And I've seen many people spray for them after pollination is complete, and that's too late because the damage they're going to cause is messing up the nick. And so if you've already completed pollination, there's really no point. They've already done the damage if there's any damage out there. The other problem with them is they remobilize so quickly. So if you spray them too early, they'll all come flying back once that insecticide wears off. So I'm I'm not telling you not to. Maybe your case warrants doing it. I'm saying the threat tends to be a little overblown, at least in my geography with corn. With that said, Rodney, I know like up your way, you have things like corn rootworm, adult beetles to have to deal with. I don't know if you want to mention anything from that realm.
Yeah, so good tee up. What we're finding too is we have extended diapause in these corn rootworm beetles. So they are overwintering in the soybean stubble and corn stalks. So we have a continuous cycle, I'll call it. And so the corn rootworm beetles they do feed on silks and pollen, and they will cause a lot of damage. Now, to Nick's point, we'll grow an inch to inch and a half of silk a day in good growing conditions. So they have to eat a lot of silk to affect pollination. But the problem is when you get jack beetles working, you get corn rootworm beetles working. You even get some stink bugs. You then you get 3 or 4 things up here in northern Illinois working. It's kind of hard for a guy not to put insecticide in to knock that population back.
Derek, I think a completely different topic, at least in Missouri, when it comes to the soybean side, jack beetles.
Yeah, actually, here recently, I haven't seen much for jack beetles and corn, but last week scouting around, I saw um, the first field I was starting to see more and more jack beetles, but actually saw one field I was getting a little bit concerned about. Just because of the level of Japanese beetles and the amount of defoliation I was seeing. But the other concern there is what stage we were at, and we're that field was at R1, which means we're probably still a couple weeks from our fungicide timing, which insecticide in with our fungicide is actually fairly common. But my fear is if they're at R1 and still a couple weeks away, and they either get worse or they maintain their level of feeding in 2 weeks, that field's gonna be, have some significant defoliation in there. It only takes about 15% defoliation at R1 to start seeing significant yield loss, and so, I'd say for my area, if jack beetles are starting to get worse and we're still 2 weeks away from fungicide and beans, we need to be out looking for that. I mean, insecticides are cheap, and I'm not saying we need to just go out there and spray insecticide just to be spraying. But I think beans have a lot of yield potential, and we're gonna have a lot of other things working against us as far as bean yields go. It'd be fairly simple, relatively speaking, to take care of jack beetles if they're a problem in your bean field right now. But just remember, just like the corn hitting tassel and pollination being sensitive, those soybeans have now become more sensitive to stress now that they're in the reproductive stages too. So keep that in mind and be on the lookout for jack beetles in your soybeans too. So.
So, Derek, that's a good tie-in. I don't know if you want to mention a little bit about soybean growth and development update, and that can kind of guide us into the soybean fungicide discussion.
Yeah, so I'd mentioned we're in reproductive stages now, and I think we'd mentioned a past podcast. Anytime you start seeing even one flower on a plant anywhere, it's an R1 at that point. Now, I mentioned most of the soybeans in my area are, and I think the other guy said it too, in that R2 are full flower. So whenever we have a flower and the top 2 nodes of the plant where we have fully expanded trifoliates, and we'll stay in that stage for a little while, relatively speaking. But we have some pushing R3, and when we get to R3, that's when we got a 3/16 inch pod. So just kind of mini pod, I guess you would, in the upper 4 nodes of the plant. And we won't even move to R4 until we got a 3/4 inch pod in the upper 4 nodes of the plant. So be scouting those upper 4 nodes here, now that we're at R2 to see when you're moving into those other stages. But a few key things there, I'll say with soybeans. So at R2, one thing that's important to remember is if your soybeans at R2, it's roughly only about half as big as it's going to get. I don't think we always think of that. Because soybeans on average, they put on about 50% of their nodes at R2. And when we think about our fungicide timing being at anywhere from R2 to R4 or that R3, I think a lot of times we think we're applying to the center of or excuse me, we're applying to the top of the plant when in reality, we're going to be applying that fungicide into what will be the center or at least the upper center of that canopy, which why that's important is because that's where about 75% of that yield is going to come from. And that's why timing with soybeans is so key because we got to remember what part of the plant we are applying it to. But I think we still have plenty of time for fungicide in soybeans is like I said, R2 to R4, but really personally, I tend to favor that R3 to R4, just given what the soybeans are doing at that time. Our ability for soybeans to compensate to stress will slow or become, they'll be unable to compensate once we get into that R4 stage. And so stress is going to have much more of an impact then as it would, say, at R2, whenever we can just put on some more flowers, things like that. But I don't know if you guys want to add to that at all, but
A comment I'll make, Derek, too, we need to be cognizant of, and that when we're in that R2 to R4, that bean plant could bounce around, but you could get into R3 and then we get a shower or moisture and it'll bounce back. So also that window is could be long, which is okay because the more nodes we put on, the more potential pod sets. And so we need to be cognizant. I'm always let's spray fungicide and things early in corn, and I'm a little later in beans. So guys may push you to let's get spraying the beans, but in all reality, you should drag your feet a little bit in the soybean crop.
Yeah, a good point.
Those are good comments, guys. And yeah, I'll say too, depending on the year, if some years a little bit later seems like it's better, depending on how the year goes. And yeah, some years right at R3 is better. Just depends on how things goes. With that said, so talking about fungicide insecticide combinations in soybeans, the fungicide product choice becomes a question. What kind of product do I use? I tend to be a premium fungicide guy in corn. I just think there's a lot of yield to be protected there. In soybeans, I'm a little more lax. I mean, everybody's got their own product of choice, what they really like. I'm not going to talk anybody out of what they're currently doing, but I'll just mention the fact I tend to put less emphasis on the fungicide of the exact fungicide choice in soybeans. This is what I do in corn, pretty adamant on the premium in corn, less so in soybeans. I tend to myself prefer a premium or a good insecticide in soybeans when it comes to that. Just something that's got some residual, especially on stink bugs. I think they rob a lot of yield from us here in Missouri that we don't account for or we don't give them credit for. But that tends to be at least my um, mojo or the way I tend to look at it in soybeans. I don't know, Derek or Rodney, if you guys want to mention anything when it comes to products of choice, fungicide, insecticide, beans.
On the same boat on that, but I will say in soybeans, if you are going a generic or something, I would go for multiple modes of action, just like we do in the premium products in corn, because we don't always know what might be coming or what could be coming at us in the soybean crop. So I am fully on board on, premium product on corn and a lot of choices in soybeans, but make sure you're using something with some at least two modes of action. So we're getting kind of a 1-2 punch.
Yeah, I'd agree with both of you there too. That application in soybeans typically isn't disease driven. I say that lightly too because we can get frog eye and we can have diseases in our soybeans. But I think we got to remember too, even though premium versus generic is going to differ in disease control, in soybeans, that fungicide play is a plant health play, and not all fungicides are going to, offer those plant health benefits the same either. So keep that in mind as well. There's certainly advantages going premium in certain cases, especially a high yielding scenario where there's a lot of potential out there with soybeans. But like Nick hit on the insecticide, my big thing is making sure we have a nutritional in there with soybeans, especially if we're going to be running, say, a generic type chemistry. Insecticides can be relatively cheap, but I think nutrition there, especially that reproductive timing, is what can make or break you with soybeans sometimes. And so having that three-way combo of a fungicide, insecticide, nutrition, especially in high yielding scenarios, I think is, in my opinion, more key than just going out with a solo premium fungicide. I'd rather see all three of those things in the mix there.
That's a good point, Derek. That was a great one to hit on. I didn't do a very good job of underscoring that when you talked about growth stages, but yeah, just for the audience, R3 growth stage, soybeans, 316 inch pod and the upper four nodes. So to Rodney's point, soybean that we tend to grow here, they're indeterminate, which means they're vegetative, reproductive at the same time. So we get more growth. We could be at R3, but we get rain after a stressful period. We get more growth. We could fall back to R2 and then have to come back to R3 and then R4 3/4 inch long pod in the upper four nodes. So yeah, just wanted to mention that so everybody knew what R3 versus R4 was in soybeans. That said, guys, you got any last comments to make to the group?
Uh, key in on timings. Just, I guess my summary would be we are at some critical stage in both corn and beans, and don't miss the window of opportunity that we have out there right now. This next week and the week after are going to be huge for timing applications, reproductive timings. So don't miss the window.
And I'll also say this was a very emotional time in the crop and, commodity markets and the weather, but we made good plans in the winter. So let's stay our plan and work our plan, and don't give up on the crop. There's a good one out there, and I'm speaking for my geography, but there's still good crop in all of our areas. And right now, to Derek and Nick's point, the crop is good, and let's give it every opportunity to give you the bushels that you need. You don't sell plants and you don't sell that, you sell bushels. So that's why we're talking very heavily on this situation.
Yeah, I'll just add and say that my ideal conditions, for corn, soybeans this time of year with plentiful moisture and mild temperatures also promotes disease. So sometimes folks look to cut some corners when we get this time of year and thinking maybe disease won't be that bad. I mean, this is an ideal disease year. There's a lot of yield set up there. Let's protect it. And let's be mindful too. In my geography, the later planted stuff tends to require more management, especially when it comes to fungicide than the earlier planted stuff. So don't give up on it either. But appreciate it, guys. And thank you, everyone, for listening. We look forward to seeing you again next time. Thanks. Thank you for joining us. This podcast is brought to you by Into Novus Knowledge. Please reach out to your Into agronomist if we can help in any way. Join us next time for more in-depth agronomic advice.